What if I told you that the empire which would one day dominate the entire Mediterranean once had no navy, no sailors, and no idea how to fight at sea? Early Rome was a power of roads, legions, and fortified camps, not waves, sails, and harbors. To the Romans, the sea was unstable, dangerous, and deeply unfamiliar. Yet history forced them into an impossible choice: master the sea or be destroyed by those who already ruled it. This is not the story of Rome becoming great sailors. It is the story of how Rome changed the very nature of naval warfare itself. Early Rome was a civilization built for land. Its power grew from farms, hills, and roads carved straight through the Italian peninsula. Roman strength was measured in legions that marched in formation, engineers who built fortified camps overnight, and commanders who understood terrain, logistics, and discipline better than anyone else. Everything about Roman warfare assumed one simple truth: solid ground beneath their feet. The sea shattered that certainty. On water, there were no camps to dig, no roads to control, and no formations to maintain. Ships swayed unpredictably, orders were harder to relay, and every familiar advantage of Roman infantry dissolved the moment they left the shore. To early Romans, the sea was not a highway, but a hostile and unstable barrier filled with danger and superstition. Culturally, Rome had little connection to maritime life. Unlike Greek or Phoenician cities, Roman society was not shaped by harbors and trade routes, but by agriculture and land ownership. Their early ships were few, small, and designed only for cautious coastal movement. They lacked both the technology and the tradition required to operate large war fleets on the open sea. This weakness was not merely inconvenient, it was strategic. Any enemy with naval superiority could raid Roman coasts, disrupt trade, and choose when and where to fight. Rome could dominate Italy on land, yet remain effectively trapped within it, unable to project power across water. As long as the sea remained uncontested, Roman expansion had a hard limit. In the 3rd century BC, this reality became impossible to ignore. Rome was growing, ambitious, and increasingly surrounded by rivals. Its legions were unmatched on land, but useless against enemies who controlled the waves. The sea exposed a fatal imbalance in Roman power, one that would soon force a radical transformation. If Rome represented discipline on land, Carthage embodied mastery of the sea. Founded by Phoenician settlers, Carthage inherited centuries of maritime knowledge passed down through generations of sailors, traders, and naval commanders. For them, the Mediterranean was not an obstacle, but a living network of routes, currents, and winds they understood intimately. Carthaginian power rested on a professional navy unlike anything Rome possessed. Their fleets were large, fast, and expertly crewed by sailors who trained from childhood. Naval combat for Carthage was a precise and highly technical art. Battles were decided by speed, maneuverability, and the ability to strike an enemy ship at the perfect angle with a reinforced bronze ram. Their warships were refined products of long evolution. Light, responsive, and deadly, they could outmaneuver clumsy opponents and destroy them without ever allowing boarding. Carthaginian captains relied on experience, intuition, and coordination developed over decades at sea. Against such opponents, Rome had no realistic hope of competing under traditional naval rules. The imbalance was obvious. Roman ships were slower and heavier. Their crews were inexperienced and prone to exhaustion and seasickness. Even a well-built Roman vessel was ineffective if its crew could not maneuver it properly in combat. A direct naval confrontation favored Carthage overwhelmingly. This superiority gave Carthage strategic freedom. They could supply distant garrisons, blockade ports, and strike Roman coastlines at will. The sea amplified their power, allowing them to choose battles and avoid unfavorable ones. Rome, by contrast, was reactive and constrained. As long as Carthage ruled the waves, Roman victories on land could never be decisive. Any war between them would ultimately be decided at sea, a domain where Rome was dangerously unprepared. The First Punic War turned Rome's weakness into an existential crisis. The conflict began in Sicily, a wealthy and strategically vital island contested by both powers. On land, Roman legions performed exactly as expected. They defeated Carthaginian forces, captured cities, and imposed pressure through methodical campaigns. But every Roman success revealed a deeper problem. Carthage controlled the surrounding waters. Their fleets freely delivered reinforcements, weapons, and food to besiege strongholds. Roman armies could surround a city for months, only to watch enemy ships replenish it with ease. Sieges dragged on, costs mounted, and victories slipped away. Worse still, Carthaginian fleets raided the Italian coastline itself. Towns were attacked, trade disrupted, and Roman prestige damaged. The Roman army could do nothing to stop it. Legions trained for land warfare were powerless against ships that struck and vanished beyond their reach. Roman commanders soon understood a harsh truth. The war could not be won without naval control. Land victories were meaningless as long as Carthage dominated the sea lanes. Sicily would never truly belong to Rome if Carthaginian fleets could move freely around it. This realization confronted the Roman Senate with a brutal choice. They could accept strategic limitations and abandon their ambitions beyond Italy, or attempt something unprecedented, building a navy capable of challenging the greatest maritime power of the age. The risks were enormous. Rome lacked experienced sailors, naval engineers, and shipbuilding traditions. Training crews and constructing fleets would demand vast resources and time, all while the war continued. Failure would mean disaster, humiliation, and vulnerability to invasion. Yet doing nothing was worse. Without change, Rome would remain a powerful but incomplete state, strong only where land allowed it to be. The sea would continue to define the limits of Roman power. Faced with this reality, Rome chose transformation, not by trying to outmatch Carthage at its own game, but by searching for a different way to fight, one that could turn Rome's greatest weakness into an unexpected advantage. For the Roman Senate, the decision to build a navy was nothing short of revolutionary. Rome had never relied on the sea for its survival, and now its fate depended on mastering an element it neither trusted nor understood. There were no naval traditions to fall back on, no generations of sailors to draw from, and no established shipyards capable of producing large war fleets. Yet Rome possessed something just as powerful: organization. The Republic was built on the ability to mobilize manpower, resources, and discipline on a massive scale. Where others relied on tradition, Rome relied on systems. The Senate authorized the construction of an entirely new fleet, not as an experiment, but as a national emergency project. Timber was requisitioned across Italy. Shipyards were established along the coast. Thousands of laborers, craftsmen, and soldiers were redirected toward a single goal: putting Rome onto the sea as quickly as possible. Crucially, Roman leaders understood that they could not defeat Carthage by copying its naval style. They would never match centuries of maritime experience in a few short years. Instead, Rome sought to create a fleet designed to support a new way of fighting, one that played to Roman strengths rather than Carthaginian skill. This was a gamble of historic proportions. Failure would expose Rome to naval disaster and economic collapse. Success would redefine the balance of power in the Mediterranean. The decision marked a turning point where Rome stopped reacting to events and began reshaping them. The Republic committed fully. There would be no half measures, no gradual learning curve. Rome would build a navy not to compete at sea as sailors, but to fight at sea as Romans. Rome's sudden leap into naval warfare was made possible by an extraordinary stroke of fortune. Early in the conflict, a Carthaginian warship ran aground on the Italian coast. Instead of a fleeting victory, the Romans had gained something far more valuable, a complete and intact example of the enemy's most advanced naval technology. This captured ship became a classroom. Roman engineers, shipwrights, and craftsmen dismantled it piece by piece, measuring every beam, joint, and curve of the hull. They studied not only how the ship was built, but why it was built that way. The shape of the hull, the placement of the oars, and the balance between speed and stability all revealed the logic behind Carthaginian naval dominance. Rome did not blindly copy the design. Instead, they adapted it. Roman ships were made slightly heavier and more robust. Speed was sacrificed in favor of strength and durability. The goal was not to outmaneuver the enemy, but to survive close contact with them. This approach reflected a broader Roman philosophy. Innovation did not mean invention from nothing. It meant borrowing, refining, and integrating ideas into a larger system. The captured ship allowed Rome to bypass decades of experimentation and leap directly into effective shipbuilding. Once the design was finalized, production began on an unprecedented scale. The Republic treated ship construction as a logistical operation rather than an artisanal craft. Standardized components were produced in large numbers, allowing ships to be assembled quickly and efficiently. Hulls, frames, and fittings followed uniform patterns, reducing errors and accelerating output. Through this process, Rome closed the technological gap with astonishing speed. What should have taken generations was achieved in months. The fleet that emerged was not elegant, but it was functional, resilient, and suited to Rome's emerging naval doctrine. By turning an enemy's strength into a blueprint, Rome transformed desperation into opportunity. The sea was still unfamiliar, but it was no longer unknowable. Building ships was only part of the challenge. Rome needed an entire naval infrastructure to support its new fleet. This required raw materials, transportation networks, skilled labor, and centralized coordination on a scale rarely seen in the ancient world. Vast quantities of timber were harvested across Italy. Oak was selected for keels and frames, pine for planking, and other woods for masts and oars. These materials were transported using Rome's extensive road system and river routes, demonstrating how land-based infrastructure now supported maritime ambition. At the shipyards, labor was divided and specialized. Some workers focused exclusively on keels, others on frames or planking. This division of labor allowed simultaneous production rather than sequential construction. Ships were no longer built individually, but assembled from standardized parts like components of a machine. The scale was staggering. Ancient sources report that Rome built over 100 major warships in a remarkably short period. Whether or not the exact numbers are exaggerated, the underlying reality remains clear. Rome mobilized its entire society to produce a navy at unprecedented speed. Alongside hull construction, thousands of oars were carved, sails woven, ropes twisted, and anchors forged. Every detail was planned and supplied in advance. Nothing was left to improvisation. This was not naval craftsmanship, it was industrialized warfare. What Rome lacked in maritime tradition, it replaced with administrative precision. Command structures were established, supply chains organized, and maintenance systems planned before the fleet ever sailed. This ability to coordinate people and resources was Rome's true naval innovation. Ships could be lost and replaced. Crews could be trained and retrained. The system endured even when individuals failed. By the time the fleet was launched, Rome had achieved something extraordinary. In less than a generation, a land power had constructed not just a navy, but a sustainable naval machine, one capable of learning, adapting, and expanding. The stage was set for the next challenge, teaching Romans how to fight at sea without ever becoming sailors. Ships alone could not win wars. Rome now faced its most difficult problem: crews. A single large warship required hundreds of rowers working in perfect coordination. Carthaginian sailors developed such skill over generations, learning to feel the rhythm of the sea itself. Rome had no such luxury. Rather than accept delay, the Romans chose another unorthodox solution. They moved naval training onto land. Along the Italian coast, training camps were constructed with wooden platforms that precisely replicated the benches, spacing, and dimensions of a real warship. Recruits sat side by side, holding full-sized oars, practicing movements exactly as they would at sea. Officers set the rhythm using shouted commands, drums, or flutes. The goal was not seamanship, but synchronization. Day after day, thousands of men trained until rowing became automatic, drilled into muscle memory through repetition and discipline. This method solved several problems at once. Training on land was safer, faster, and scalable. Large numbers of recruits could be prepared simultaneously while ships were still under construction. By the time the fleet was launched, its crews were not experienced sailors, but they were coordinated, responsive, and obedient. Rome did not try to create masters of the sea. It created crews capable of executing orders under pressure. For the strategy Rome envisioned, that was enough. Even with ships and trained crews, Rome still faced an unavoidable reality. It could not defeat Carthage through speed and maneuver. Ramming tactics demanded precision that only long maritime experience could provide. Rome needed a way to impose its own style of combat. The solution came in the form of a simple but revolutionary device: the Corvus. Mounted at the bow of Roman warships, it was a heavy wooden boarding bridge fitted with a sharp iron spike at its end. Suspended vertically during approach, the bridge could be dropped suddenly onto an enemy vessel. When the spike pierced the enemy deck, the two ships became locked together. In an instant, the Carthaginian captain lost what mattered most: freedom of movement. Speed and maneuverability no longer decided the battle. At that moment, Rome's true strength took over. Legionaries stormed across the bridge in formation, shields locked and swords ready. The naval battle transformed into a land fight on floating platforms. Discipline, armor, and close combat training overwhelmed enemy crews unprepared for sustained hand-to-hand combat. The Corvus was not elegant. It was heavy, crude, and dangerous in rough seas. But tactically, it was brilliant. It neutralized Carthage's greatest advantage and replaced it with a contest Rome was designed to win. This was not an attempt to master naval tradition. It was an act of strategic defiance. Rome refused to play by the enemy's rules and instead rewrote them. The sea became an extension of Roman land warfare, not a separate domain requiring centuries of experience. The Corvus embodied Roman military thinking at its best: identify the problem, ignore convention, and apply overwhelming force where the enemy is weakest. It was an asymmetric weapon, born from necessity, that would change the course of the war. The true test of Rome's new naval doctrine came in 260 BC at the Battle of Mylae. The Roman fleet, commanded by the consul Gaius Duilius, encountered a seasoned Carthaginian force confident in its superiority. From their perspective, victory seemed inevitable. Roman ships appeared slower, heavier, and awkwardly equipped with unfamiliar structures on their bows. Carthaginian captains advanced aggressively, intending to ram and disable the Roman vessels as they had done countless times before. As they closed in, they unknowingly entered the range of Rome's trap. One by one, Roman ships dropped their corvi. The iron spikes slammed into enemy decks, locking vessels together. What should have been swift naval strikes turned into immobilized struggles. Roman legionaries surged forward, transforming the engagement into a series of brutal boarding actions. The results were shocking. Carthaginian crews, trained for maneuver and ramming, were overwhelmed by disciplined infantry fighting at close quarters. Ship after ship fell into Roman hands. By the end of the battle, Rome had captured or destroyed a significant portion of the Carthaginian fleet. Mylae was more than a victory. It was proof. Rome had demonstrated that naval supremacy did not require superior seamanship. It required superior strategy. A power once helpless at sea had defeated the Mediterranean's greatest navy by redefining what naval combat meant. The psychological impact was immense. Rome gained confidence. Carthage gained caution. The balance of power had shifted, not because Rome had become better sailors, but because it had become better at turning the sea into its own battlefield. Despite its success, the Corvus was never a perfect solution. The same weight that made it effective in battle also made Roman ships dangerously unstable. Mounted high at the bow, the boarding bridge raised the ship's center of gravity and reduced its ability to handle rough seas. In calm conditions, this weakness was manageable. In storms, it was catastrophic. Several Roman fleets were lost not to enemy action, but to violent weather. Ships capsized, crews drowned, and entire expeditions vanished beneath the waves. The weapon that had delivered Rome its first naval victories now threatened its survival. Rome responded not with stubbornness, but with adaptation. By the middle of the First Punic War, Roman sailors had accumulated real maritime experience. Commanders had learned maneuvering, formation sailing, and coordination at sea. The fleet no longer depended entirely on boarding bridges to win. Gradually, the Corvus was abandoned. This decision reflected a mature military mindset. Rome did not cling to a tool simply because it had worked before. Once the Corvus became more dangerous than useful, it was discarded without sentiment. The abandonment of the Corvus marked a transition. Rome was no longer compensating for inexperience. It was becoming a true naval power in its own right, capable of fighting on multiple levels, at range, in maneuver, and in close combat. The sea was no longer an enemy. It had become a domain. Rome understood. With Carthage defeated and rival navies broken, the role of the Roman fleet began to change. It was no longer built solely for decisive battles. Instead, it became an instrument of imperial control. The Mediterranean transformed into a strategic artery. Grain from Egypt and North Africa, raw materials from distant provinces, and manufactured goods all flowed across the sea. Rome's population and armies depended on uninterrupted maritime supply. Protecting these routes became a primary mission of the fleet. Roman warships escorted merchant convoys, suppressed piracy, and enforced order along thousands of kilometers of coastline. Ports were expanded, fortified, and standardized. Lighthouses, warehouses, and artificial harbors were constructed using advanced Roman engineering, including hydraulic concrete that allowed building directly in the sea. The fleet also provided unmatched strategic mobility. Legions could be transported rapidly to trouble spots across the empire, allowing Rome to respond to revolts or invasions with speed no land-based power could match. Control of the sea meant control of time and distance. By the 1st century BC, the Mediterranean had effectively become an internal Roman lake. The Romans called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. This was not propaganda, but reality. Naval dominance ensured economic stability, political unity, and long-term peace. The Roman fleet did not simply support the empire. It held it together. Rome did not conquer the sea because it loved ships or sailing. It conquered the sea because it learned how to adapt under pressure. Faced with a weakness that threatened its survival, Rome did not imitate its enemies blindly. It identified its own strengths and reshaped warfare around them. The Roman Navy was not born from tradition, but from necessity. Organization replaced experience. Discipline replaced intuition. Systems replaced individual brilliance. Even Rome's most famous naval invention, the Corvus, was never treated as sacred. When it ceased to serve a purpose, it was abandoned. This willingness to change was Rome's true advantage. Victory did not come from a single weapon or battle, but from a process of constant learning, adjustment, and improvement. By mastering the sea, Rome unlocked the foundation of empire. Trade flourished, armies moved freely, and distant provinces became connected parts of a single system. The Mediterranean ceased to divide lands and instead unified them. The story of Rome's navy is not simply a tale of ships and battles. It is a lesson in strategic thinking that still resonates today. Power belongs not to those who are strongest at the start, but to those who adapt fastest when the rules change.